I thought I'll do another one of these. This time I want to introduce a tool that I sort of developed, again, with the help of AI, of course, to actually become sovereign over my own voice memos and audio transcripts. Let me just show you what I do a lot actually these days. So what I use often is, a transcription service. When I have a meeting or an interview, I actually do a recording of the interview or the meeting, and then I use AI sort of to distill essentially the actionable items, or do a summary of to-dos and whatnot. This is very useful. It's a very much productivity enhancing, because of course, oftentimes you have a meeting. But we care about sort of a to-do list or the actionable items that come out of this meeting. So this is an example of a transcription service that I use. It's very well integrated, for example, into Slack or other sort of tools. This was actually an interview I gave with a thing that was meant to be a podcast. Actually, it had quite some backing from what I could tell, but then it sort of never took off. There was a set of interviews that were being done with, myself, I think the former head of the Council of Economic Advisors of the Joe Biden, and a few others were sort of lined up, but then for some reason, the podcast never took off. But you can see here, this is a transcript of that interview. And so you see how it has been sort of transcribed and matched to the audio has been transcribed and matched to the transcript. And then, of course, that's the raw material. Now I could give that transcript to an AI, and then the AI can potentially provide an outline to me, or I can have a conversation with my own interview or transcript if I want to sort of distill things a bit further. But ultimately, this transcript is the heart of it. That's your data. That's what is valuable and useful. And this particular commercial subscription service, unfortunately, when I try to kind of download all the bulk of all the recordings, it actually, requires you to get a super premium subscription. I thought, well, this can't be that difficult. And so, in fact, yeah, in a couple of hours, I sort of was able to put something together, which is sort of deployed here in this GitHub repository called Sovereign Audio. Um, so let me just sort of walk you through the pipeline of how this works. Ultimately, what we have here in this repository is, a simple tool that allows you to record or import existing MP3s or WAV audio files. It then diarizes, so it tries to recognize the unique speakers using voice print embeddings. What this does is essentially, it performs because the data underlying this is just, a frequency distribution and modulation, right? That's what, audio data is. You can essentially try to do then clustering on the data, on the voice data on the recording. And then when this clustering is done, you can label these clusters and assign them to a speaker. This process is called diarization. And of course, there's a transcription part as well, a simple transcription that simply translates the speech to text. And this is using a OpenAI WhisperX model, which is open source. I then sort of worked a little bit to sort of add some more extensions, such as, or potentially sketch avenues of how this might be further used. For example, using semantic search. That's why I sort of added embeddings. So you can turn your transcripts into embeddings. And then through these embeddings, this is all done locally with Olama and a local embedding model. You could then perform semantic search if you wanted to kind of discover or recover an existing transcript or content that you have produced. So let me just walk you through how this looks on your device. So when you download the zip file from GitHub, or you clone it, you get a zip file, you unzip it, and then all you need to do is essentially go into that folder. And so let's do this. So we see these are the files, and you kind of see the different functions of the different Python sort of subscripts, refactored subscripts. We have a diarization, we have a voice print. There's a database just for file management. Again, these will all get created in the process of running it. Now, when you want to if you have sort of the if you're on a Mac and you do have the extension, the Xcode extensions, you can literally just use the make command, and so you can actually create a virtual environment, and this virtual environment will then download, read the requirements text file that essentially has all the packages that you need for your local deployment. So see, it's downloading various Python packages. And once this is done, it takes a few seconds. You can just simply basically launch and get right into it. Again, there is not that much to it. There's a lot of potential ways of extending this tool further, but what's most important to me is that you're kind of sovereign over your own data, and you essentially end up getting content stored in your own sort of file system rather than sort of in the cloud. Actually, let me just talk about this here. So we have, the transcriptions, the text files will be stored in the transcriptions folder. The recordings, the original recordings will be stored in the recordings folder. There's a subfolder called imported where you can actually import existing recordings into your system. And of course, there's this embeddings pipeline. Typically, actually, embeddings, if you wanted to really do this full on, you would want to sort of store that in a sort of a database that's optimized for embeddings, such as Chroma, or there's quite a few other solutions. But again, they can be self-sovereign and hosted on your own device. So we have now sort of installed all the dependencies, and now we can literally just do make run to launch it. There might be a step where in the background it's sort of downloading some specific language prints, because part of the processing pipeline involves detecting the language that is spoken in the first 30 seconds of a recording. Of course, if you switch language, that would require some more sophistication in the pipeline. But if you're consistent in a language, it will then download essentially the relevant file for the subscription for the transcription recognition, so that it sort of recognizes English and then sort of passes the audio through an English language model. So it now launched a small GUI, and you kind of see here the server sort of responding a little bit to see what is being clicked on. So let's have a look. You can start a recording. You can give that a meeting title. You can add tags that you don't need to. And so now it's recording. You can pause the recording. You can stop the recording. I'm speaking English, so it should pick up this. It could be that the first recording doesn't work because it's in the background downloading, some, the English sort of fingerprint, so to say, for the transcription. But let's stop the recording, and we can sort of click on transcribe, and now it attempts to transcribe. You see here, audio is shorter than 30 seconds. Language taken, maybe detected language English with a probability of 98% in the first 30 seconds of the audio. Again, as I said, it could be that the first version doesn't work. It's still saying that it's transcribing. But here actually it sort of goes directly to the diarization. And so you want to identify a speaker, it sort of gives you sort of a sentence that has been said, and you can sort of manually add this. So here I add my name, EN in sort of English, because it turns out that my voice in German sounds slightly different than in English. Um, and so, I confirm that and off you go. So now let's look actually at the, what's being stored. We have here the recording. This is the recording that I've just sort of spoken. And then we end up, okay, yeah, this is exactly, so the first one doesn't work. So let's actually try it again. Test to confirm. So we're doing this again, and just speaking and transcribing and seeing whether this works is essentially what I've been doing quite a bit. Again, literally, but the core time to put this together was like less than 4 hours. So it's really not that difficult. In fact, it was funny, at some point I had a meeting with some folks in the European Commission. There's literally people who take minutes. And then they sort of their job is to clean the minutes, circulate them, and share. And they didn't seem to be using one of these tools, or it was not very clear to me what tools they were using. And I said, well, look, it's going to take me a couple hours to sort of put this together in a way that produces self-sovereign, a self-sovereign tool that's not reliant sort of on some existing cloud-based infrastructure with potentially risks about privacy and what happens with your own data. Anyways, this should be long enough. So let's stop. And let's transcribe and diarize the recording. Um, Again, it detected English in the first 30 seconds. It should be relatively fast. I mean, this was a bit longer, I think, than the first recording. And so it takes a bit longer, but it's much faster than actually the time it took to just speak. And so again, it asks for the speaker assignment. Now we've created a fingerprint for this in English, so I can just sort of attach my name. In fact, it was funny. So it sort of asked me for snippets and asked, where essentially the clustering algorithm could not, the distance to the nearest voice print was too high, and so it did not assign a speaker. And so, here you kind of see the end result. But if we now go into the transcriptions, you now see essentially, I know the first one popped up here as well, so it was just a bit buggy or leggy. Anyways, you see that here we have the full uh, you have the full sort of transcript, so to say. And oops, we don't want this. There's too many things open. But ultimately, so now we see a lot of stuff. Ultimately, it's a very convenient little tool that gives you sovereignty over your own data, which I think is quite useful. And again, the accuracy of these tools are actually quite high. What I'm doing these days is I'm basically testing out both. I keep on using the commercial service, but I actually leverage a mixture of, I'm trying to run both in parallel to then see to what extent I can lean on my recordings and my transcripts sort of in a sort of more hands-off way, because then it's easy to just take the text files, drag them into a local large language model and sort of use that as part of its knowledge base in a way that, of course, Otter and the other commercial providers try to do that as well. But they sort of detach you from your own data and they want you to kind of get hooked on that ecosystem and then sort of like be stuck in it. And then, of course, that's the time when they start racking up the subscription price and so on. And so you want to make sure that you sort of build sort of a parallel infrastructure where you have potentially a threat point or the cost of moving is not too high. So I hope that some of you will find this useful. I think it's quite cool. And yeah, see you next time.